This is Tyler Lovelady. Despite his last name, he actually hurt a lady less than 12 years old. However, his bond was set at just $185,000, demonstrating that in Alabama, dangerous individuals who commit the worst of crimes are not given the worst of penalties. Is Alabama a sanctuary state for these types of dangerous criminals? And is incest really common in Alabama? According to arrest records, just about every single county's got somebody locked up for it. Without a doubt, the most disappointing aspect of this situation is how lenient the courts in Alabama are towards the perpetrators. We've all heard the cousin jokes in Alabama and wondered, is it really true? Sadly, it really is. Based on arrest records in Alabama, I created this map of the region of the state where incest is the most prevalent. If you've been a victim of this situation, I hope that today's video can help you understand that many other people have gone through the same situation. The most horrifying thing about victims of this crime in Alabama is that many times the court systems let these people back out on the streets where they can commit these crimes again. The situation is already hard enough for the victims, but when the court systems don't do their job accordingly, it's like adding insult to injury. Keep in mind that these are real victims who have lived nightmares in their lifetime, so if your comments are not respectful, they're going to be deleted. So if you've been a victim of a crime like this in Alabama, I made this video for you. Thank you for watching. Blount County News recently gave us an update today saying that this man right here, 37-year-old Kevin Burgett, had been released from jail on bond despite the fact that he has committed some of the most horrendous crimes that have ever taken place in Alabama. It's crazy to think that this story comes out today since I'm working currently on a project about the reality of incest in Alabama. Of course, people in Alabama deny that this exists in their state, but I recently spent 2 entire days looking at arrest records from Alabama, and it turns out that incest is really a common occurrence in the state. I can't read the charges out loud on YouTube because of their nature, but here, if you pause the video, you can get a grasp of the nature of person you're dealing with. I reviewed the case thoroughly, and it seems like the charges and evidence against this individual are substantial. I know for most of us in society, after reading this man's charges, the notion that he was able to bond out of jail is absolutely wild. But let's not forget that Alabama is a sanctuary state for particularly those who commit incest. Meanwhile, this Latino woman who was found with 2 stolen vehicles was given a $500,000 bail because allegedly she's a flight risk. The release of this man back into the community hasn't gone without outrage and outcry in the community of Alabama. Frustration mounting over the corruption, nepotism that exists in this state where individuals are able to get out after committing horrendous crimes simply because of who they know, or because the courts are more focused on jamming people up heavily, those that match their political narrative. Don't think that everybody in Alabama agrees with these decisions. A lot of people are filled with outrage about the types of people that are being released back into their community, and also the types of people that are being extracted from their communities. Blount County isn't the only sanctuary county in Alabama for these horrendous crimes. In Etowah County, this man was released on a $40,000 bond, and again, if you want to see his charges, you're just going to have to pause the video. Oneonta is a beautiful rural community, a small town with a large Hispanic community in north central Alabama. Despite this community having great people and actually being a nice little town, recently, in Blount County as well, this individual by the name of Terry Murphy was charged with hurting children in clergy position. And this is really what's sad about Alabama. Individuals are entrusted with the community and they end up being some of the most deprived people out there. Imagine a guy who's been entrusted with the religious faith of the community, hurting children and committing human trafficking. And again, I can't read the charges he's being blamed of. You can pause the video and examine it yourself. Now, he didn't have any charges of incest, but the fact that he's a member of clergy engaging in these types of activities just goes to show how deprived Alabama has become. Blount County only has about 60,000 people, but look at how many cases they have of this nature. These are not exactly large places. These are small communities where everybody seems to know everybody. Despite being a small place, Kevin Burgett isn't the only nasty inbreeding hick in Blount County. Meet Randy Cantrell. He was arrested in Blount County, Alabama. He traveled all the way from Mississippi, a small town that's right on the Alabama-Mississippi border. There must have been some family members he wanted to visit in Alabama. He was charged for incest in Blount County as well, and this was as recently as 2023. And again, I can't really read his charges, but you can see something about 12-year-old, and you can see something about incest in there somewhere. You can see domestic violence, abuse, tampering with physical evidence, and electronic solicitation. So he actually solicited somebody in Alabama, came to Alabama, who was a family member apparently, less than 12 years old. This is a horrendous crime, and it isn't the only one in Blount County. And that's really what's sad about these stories, is how pervasive and often these small towns in Alabama have to arrest somebody for committing incest with somebody that's too young. And the crazy thing is, this is only the ones being charged with it dealing with minors. You know, as adults who are consenting, who knows how common this issue is in Alabama. Now, I used to live close to Shelton County, and while living in Shelton County's vicinity, I met an area of people that is completely inbred. In fact, there I met individuals who were like generationally inbred, and I'm not really going to go and expose these people's town and story because I really feel like this is something embarrassing. But you may have heard of places like Slap Out, you may have heard places like Deedsville, and somewhere in that vicinity up there is an area where there's a lot of people who are generationally inbred, and the people have disformities and stuff like that. Now, I'm not going to go cover a story on that. I know a lot of YouTubers who knew these places and knew these people personally would go and exploit these stories, but I don't really think that this is something you should exploit. I know a few YouTubers who would die to know a place like this where people are like this, but I've seen what they've done to the Whittakers over there in the Virginias, and I just don't want to do that to the people of Alabama. I do want people to know that this exists and that there are communities in Alabama that have this problem. I just couldn't see myself exploiting these people's physical disabilities and ailments just for a story. Just down the road from where I lived in Millbrook, Alabama, was this little town called Elmore, and in that vicinity as well, I met a man who clearly had some visible disformities. And this individual was kind of like from that situation where they're generationally inbred, leaving him with many disformities. Now, the guy was an absolute beast of a dude, very tall, very strong, and communicating with him was a little bit difficult. He was able to hold a job, but obviously you could tell he had some very serious disformities from inbreeding. And of course, many people just use the word inbreeding interchangeably with line breeding, but there is a difference. Inbreeding is closer. Line breeding is like second cousins and stuff like that. What really happens in Alabama isn't so much inbreeding, but line breeding. And that creates a situation where the individuals eventually develop very serious disformities and physical abnormalities. Facial, you can tell by their face is disformed, maybe the size of their ears, maybe their overall width or height and shape is disformed. These are just unnatural practices that lead to people ending up in lifelong ailments of physical disability because the parents were irresponsible in selecting a proper marriage mate. So of course, Shelton County is one of the epicenters for inbreeding and incest in Alabama, and looking through their arrest records, it is very disappointing to see how many people are actually charged with this crime. And let's not forget that the overwhelming majority of people who do this do not end up getting arrested. Many times, unfortunately, this type of crime gets covered up and people really don't press charges. It's only like in rare occasions where people actually press charges and decide to put somebody in prison for this type of behavior. Overwhelmingly, most people who engage in these activities get away with it. But let's just look at the arrest records from Shelton County, just so you guys can understand that this does happen in Alabama. And one of the most shocking things to me about living in this part of Alabama is that people know this is wrong, but they almost laugh at it. Like they get a chuckle out of it when they hear a story about somebody or when they see somebody that's inbred. It's almost like celebrated in Alabama. Meet Micah Epler. He is from Clanton, Alabama, in Shelton County, just north of where I used to live. Now, he's being charged with incest with a minor. And again, I can't read all of his charges. He's listed of being in Shelton County, Clanton, Alabama. He's only 19 years old. His bond set at $270,000. Seems like a lot of money until you realize that in Alabama, the average drug dealer that gets caught gets put on $1 million bail. That means that at least here in this part of Alabama, if you commit one of these types of crimes like what Micah committed, the bond is only about a quarter of what a drug trafficker would get. And keep in mind that the R word is in these charges. We're not going to dive into the details of their crimes, but they are horrendous crimes to begin with. The issue is that many times these individuals own a lot of land. Here in Shelton County, for example, the town of Clanton, I talked to an individual who told me that he has pictures of the judge engaging in prostitution with a female. They took photos of it, and they have those photos, and every time these individuals go to court, they have photos of the judge doing something he's not supposed to, and he's married, and they go to church together and stuff like that. So what happens in these small towns is that many times the criminals put the judges and other public officials in a situation where, they have information to extort them over. And maybe even if the wife knew that this thing was happening, it's not the same as a photo of a judge doing these types of things being put into the public. So what happens in these areas is that many times the people who are in public offices are kind of compromised by individuals in their communities who know something about them or have evidence on them, and well, they're kind of compromised. And when these people end up in the courtroom, they always got to let them go because they know something about them or they're in a position where they could taint their name. In the case of Shelton County, Alabama, one of the most pervasive areas for incest and these types of crimes, the last month or two that I spent in Alabama were very dangerous moments of my life. And me and my wife would go eat at restaurants, and we would do our grocery shopping in other towns that wasn't the town we lived in because we were trying to change up our patterns because people were following us. So in the last month that I was in Alabama, I actually spent a lot of time in this area. So even though I didn't live here, when things got really dangerous for me, I decided to do most of my grocery shopping and restaurant eating and all those types of things here in Clanton in Shelton County because I figured that it would just be further away from the people that were trying to hurt me. So we started changing up our patterns every day and stuff like that. We would spend a lot of time here. And in that time period, I was really able to have some in-depth conversations with the locals about corruption and many of the things that are facing the state of Alabama. And in this particular county, you have individuals who they know something about people in local offices, so when they get jammed up, they are able to work their way out of it easily. And I think part of the problem of Alabama stems from the fact that public officials have to live up to a moral reputation. The communities impose religious and political and thousands of different requirements from local offices that these individuals simply can't live up to. The expectations for the community are that these people have to be Grady judges, the Grady judge that we have here in Florida. They have to be these exceptional heroes, but in reality, yeah, they see a hooker from time to time. Yeah, they smoke from time to time. Yeah, they do some stuff that are perhaps not the type of things that in their church they would want to hear somebody mention about them. And it's the reality that Alabama has, that local officials have to live up to an expectation from the public that isn't realistic. They have to be these morally clean people because that's what the people in Alabama imagine that public officials have to be. But they forget that people who are in public offices are no different than me and you, who have their vices and habits as well. And it's this obligation that public officials have in these rural communities to have an image of being morally clean that makes their life infinitely complicated because there's individuals out there who know dang right that that isn't the case. And, people show up to courtrooms with a photo in an envelope type of situation. And that's all it takes for them to be able to walk away from something like a criminal charge. And that's just the way law works in Alabama. And many people abuse the system of their moral code that they have to uphold, being in the Deep South, being in what they call the Bible Belt, where they all have to pretend like they're these morally clean people, but in reality they're not. And people in the community know that. And when those individuals go to court, all they need is an envelope in front of them for the person behind that desk to know that you might be a judge, but I got a photo your wife want to see. I got a photo the church might want to see. And that keeps these individuals in a position where they can extort public officials simply by, trying to uphold an image of moral cleanliness that isn't even realistic. And endemically, the problem of nepotism, favoritism, and corruption in Alabama stems from the fact that individuals have to uphold a public image that isn't even realistic. That's why when you look at the bonds in Alabama, you see individuals who are clearly being demonized by their behavior. They want to put their moral codes and their views and their standards into the legal system and reflect it with high bonds for people who commit things like being illegal. But then, when one of their buddies shows up in the courtroom that has a picture of them doing something they're not supposed to, they have to be lenient on them. And this is sadly what happens in small places where the law can easily be perverted. And I'm not really putting this out there to go after this particular individual in this county, but what I'm saying is he's no different than any other person. And unfortunately, these public officials in Alabama are many times scrutinized to the point where it's unrealistic, and it leads them to have to do things that are of this nature, not because they want to, but because they're compromised to try to uphold something that isn't realistic. This is the town of Jemison in Shelton County, Alabama. It's just north of Clanton. This young man here has, again, interesting charges. The types of charges that I couldn't really even read to you on YouTube, but again, you're welcome to pause the video. His name is Nicholas Hester. Notice that among his charges are terroristic threats. So he's getting jammed up on this horrific charge, but at the same time, he's threatening the officials that are trying to arrest him. And this is kind of how people in Alabama operate. Once they get jammed up, they always make threats to officials saying, if you arrest me for this, I'm going to expose that, or I got photos of this, or I got information on that. Those are considered threats to public officials, and that's probably why he has those charges attached to his arrest. And $870,000 might sound like a large and excessive bail, but let's not forget that in this part of Alabama, if you got caught with a few pounds of weed, your bond would be higher than that. So it may look like a lot of money, but after the crimes he committed, should he even be getting a bond? Many times in Alabama, if you're caught with drug charges like drug trafficking, they don't give you a bond. So you're on the interstate right now, you get pulled over in Alabama, you got 10 or 20 pounds of weed on you, you're not getting a bond. But this guy who committed these crimes right here, he will be getting a bond. And remember that the only thing more enticing than a cousin in Alabama is the comeback sauce at Jack's. If you ever find yourself in Alabama, before you consider a cousin, consider eating at Jack's Chicken. It's really my favorite thing about going to Alabama. I love their comeback sauce. They're also in the state of Georgia now, and I believe they're coming to Florida soon. Jack's is definitely one of my favorite restaurants. They're all over the South. They're in Tennessee, they're in Alabama, they're in Georgia and Mississippi. And Alabama's sweet tea is the best. The one at Jack's is one of my favorites. So if you find yourself in Alabama, don't forget to try Jack's Family Restaurant. I definitely recommend it. This isn't a paid ad. I'm just letting you know, if you go to Alabama, before you consider a cousin, consider their chicken. This right here is Gadsden, Alabama. It is in Etowah County with about 100,000 people. It's somewhat of a small place. You may remember the story about the sheriff in Alabama who used the money for inmates to buy food to buy himself a beach house in Florida. He was questioned about his decision to use that money to buy himself a beach home, and eventually his charges were expunged. In the state of Alabama, if a sheriff decides to use the money to feed inmates to buy himself a beach home in Florida, it's really not a big deal. That big red sign right there is Jack's, and the only thing more appealing to people in Alabama than a cousin is getting some good southern chicken. Here in Etowah County, DeMarcus Sharp was given some horrific charges assaulting the family there. Again, you're welcome to slow down the video, pause it, and examine his charges thoroughly. His bond was set at $250,000. You guys may remember that earlier in the video, somebody with 2 stolen vehicles had a $500,000 bond, proving that in Alabama, a car is worth more than a child. Now, this guy actually physically hurt children, and he produced photography in the act. So explain to me how a guy that just had possession of that footage was given $1 million bond in the same county, while the person who actually does the act and record it and distribute it was charged with less. These are the question marks that only the people in Alabama can answer to me, because I don't get it. How does the person who committed the crime get less bail than the person who had an image of it? These are the questions that the people in Alabama have to answer on today's video, because I simply can't wrap my head around this notion. If I had to take an educated guess on why this is the case, knowing the people of Alabama and their habits and their way of moving, I guess because it was a black family, they were worth less, and that's why the bond is less. This is a practice in the state of Alabama where people's bonds are correlating exactly with who the victim is and what their race is. For example, in the case of a white victim, the bond will be higher. In the case of a black victim, the bond will be lower. And in the case of a Hispanic victim, the bond will be 1/1000th of a fraction. And if you think I'm kidding, I'm not. We've actually did a previous video on bonds and arrests in Alabama related to immigration, and we saw people who committed the same exact crime, and simply based on their race, the bond went from $300 for the victim being a Hispanic female to over $1 million for the bond being white. So it's just one of those scenarios where in Alabama, your race plays into the bond, and that's why you end up with situations where somebody who hurts somebody, a child, gets a $250,000 bond, but this white guy with a photo ends up getting $1 million bond. If you live in Alabama and you have a better explanation, I would love to hear it, because to me, that's the only thing that I could understand with this scenario. Again, the people of Alabama, this is your call. You explain it to me. It just comes down to that in Alabama, if the victim is black, they're worth about a quarter less than a white person. And if they're Hispanic, they're worth about 100th. And if you don't believe me, you can do your own research in any county in Alabama, and you'll see that that's how the bond system in Alabama works. A black person's worth a quarter of a white person, and a Hispanic is worth about 100th. That's the way the legal system in Alabama works, and don't take my word for it. Do your own research and you'll see. Basically, in Alabama, they're not going to allow a black victim to be worth more than a white victim. That's why this individual, despite committing horrendous crimes, is getting a relatively low bond. Now, if you look at it from the outside, you would say, well, the white guy got a higher bond, but it's all about the victim, what the victim's worth. So forget about the value of, okay, here's a white guy with a higher bond than a black guy. That's not the real story. The real story is deeper than that. The real story is, who's the victim? Can a black victim be worth more than a white one? Absolutely not, especially in Alabama. Now, at this point in the video, you're probably wondering, where the crap are the people? This is a 3-lane highway. It's completely empty. Well, this is one of those counties in Alabama that has been having a reduction in population. Etowah County used to be a great place in the past, but it's completely empty today, vacant and abandoned. It's a place that has been losing a lot of population. Many of the Hispanics moved into Etowah County and tried to buy the houses that were affordable and try to revitalize their communities, but they went on an onslaught of arresting people that were moving into Ottawa County. So just to summarize it real quickly, easily I found about 100 arrests of Hispanics in Ottawa County for immigration charges. That means they're heavily going after Hispanics in this county. So despite the fact that their town is empty, vacant, and going to crap, and the only people that are moving here and trying to revitalize Gadsden are the Hispanics, these are the only people who have moved to this town, bought properties, and tried to revitalize the town. And they're getting extradited from their town. I don't know if you saw the arrest that I just showed you guys, but did you notice how almost none of these Hispanic people had a bond? So they don't give bonds to Hispanics in this county. So a murderer, an incestuous person, somebody hurting children can get a bond. But somebody who doesn't have a driver's license, if they get arrested in this county, they can't get bonded out. So this should just show you how screwed up the priorities are in Alabama, where somebody who hurts children is able to easily get back out there and do it again, while somebody who moved to their community to revitalize it and work and drive and help their community build back up, that's really the person who doesn't get a bond. The only Hispanic that I found out of all these arrests that had a bond is this guy right here. Now, I don't know why this guy got off so easy. His bond was only $2,500. He had DUI, suspended license. He had a DUI. He had a lot of different things going on, and he got a relatively low bond. Now, he was arrested by the Atala Police Department, and Atala has a Hispanic community, so maybe it was the court system telling the Atala Police Department, hey, you know what, we're going to release this guy on a low bond back to your community, kind of like a slap in the face saying, okay, you know, you want to harbor these people, well, let's throw him back in your community. So this is kind of how the state of Alabama works. Like, they don't look at what did the person do and how are we going to punish them. They look at, okay, race, does anybody owe us a debt? Who's indebted to us? Who do we want to demonize? Who do we have to protect? There's so much nepotism that goes into who goes to jail, who gets a bond, and who doesn't in Alabama, that it heavily perverts justice. They're not focused on making Alabama a safer place. They're not focused on locking up dangerous people. They're focused on, okay, who is this person? Who's the victim? Who's the arresting police agency? And that's the way they look at arrests. And then when you see how much of a crime crap hole Alabama is, it's understandable when you realize that they're not trying to lock up the most dangerous people. They're trying to lock up the people that fit their political agenda. Now meet Christopher Trasher. This trashy guy in Etowah County was arrested for torturing a child willfully and a bunch of other charges, and his bond was $2,500. So again, what is the value of a child in the state of Alabama? It's absolutely wild how these individuals who endanger children and hurt children get these low bonds in Alabama, but individuals who simply are being arrested for immigration or don't have a valid driver's license are ending up with no bonds. And then you wonder, why is Alabama so dangerous? Why are their cities empty? Why does everybody live off the government and public housing and food stamps? Nobody wants to work. Look at the society that they're creating in Alabama. Their entire legal system is based off of racial retaliation. That's the only thing that matters to these people. Race, nepotism, favoritism. What race are you? And not so much, are you a dangerous person? Don't release a dangerous white individual back into the streets. If the victim is black or Hispanic, they don't care how horrendous the crime was. And this is why Alabama is so dangerous, because their legal system is so focused and caught up on racism and politics that it forgets that their job isn't to perpetrate their racial or other ideological beliefs on society, but their job is to make their state safe. And how are they doing? Well, Alabama is the third most dangerous state by homicide rate alone. And that just goes to demonstrate that whatever they're doing in Alabama isn't working. Meet Jason from Morgan County, Alabama. He is being charged with incest forcibly. His bond is pending. Now, this happened back in 2024, so this case is less than a year old. He's a white male, 44 years old. Is he going to be able to pull some strings? We'll find out. So as we can see on today's video, incest is common in Alabama. Chilton County, Etowah County, Morgan and Blount County, in the north central part of the state of Alabama, there are plenty of people being arrested for incest. And keep in mind that these are mostly targeting children. This is a common practice in Alabama, and unfortunately the state of Alabama is somewhat of a sanctuary state for these types of crimes, where the law kind of harbors these individuals and gives them bonds that are very low. For example, take a look at this guy right here. Eric Stevens lives on South Side. This is kind of like a nice suburb of Etowah County over there in Gadsden, so he's kind of living in the suburbs. Eric Stevens distributed images to minors and exposed himself. His bond was only $2,000. Why is this guy only getting a $2,000 bond on exposing himself and distributing these types of things to minors? Is it because he lives in a nice affluent suburb and not a bad neighborhood? Is it because he's, maybe his last name carries some weight? It would be interesting to know why this guy only got a $2,000 bond for this kind of horrific crime. Now, just 2 days ago, this guy right here was sentenced to 50 years for a horrific crime that he committed, abusing young girls in Etowah County, and the crimes also extended into Florida. His bond was set between $13 to $16 million. There were several victims. Some of these things happened in Florida. Now, usually, when these types of things happen in Alabama, as we've seen, they're very lenient towards the criminals. Why this guy got thrown underneath the bus for 15 years, we may never know. Now, there's a lot of questions about why this guy got a 50-year sentence. Many people believe that it's because Etowah County has become under so much scrutiny because of how lenient they've been with these types of criminals that they finally wanted to make an example out of him. Also, this guy's crimes happened in Florida and in Alabama. Thus, it received media attention from outside of the state of Alabama. And perhaps Etowah County is in a situation now where they have to crack down and give some of these people some hefty sentences because they've come under scrutiny for doing the complete opposite for so long, which only goes to show, again, the outreach and thoughtless process that goes into what happens in the legal processes in Alabama. When they need to make a bold statement, they'll throw somebody underneath the bus heavily. In the case of this guy's case, it drew media attention because some of the things happened in Florida. So perhaps they needed to make an example out of him and try to clean their name by giving one person a hefty prison sentence. But that doesn't change the fact that just because you sent one person for 50 years, you haven't been letting hundreds of others go leniently. But it doesn't change the fact that while in one county you're giving a guy 50 years, in the next county over, you're letting another guy out for doing the same exact thing. In reality, all these guys should be getting 50 years for the crimes they committed. Most people in society consider this one of the absolute worst crimes that could exist. And when the victim is also being a victim of incest, it just makes a horrendous crime even that much worse. So despite this one recent sentence of 50 years to this one individual, many people just speculate that because this case got media attention and because this guy was down in Florida gathering attention from other agencies and all the things that they're accusing the Etowah County Police Department at the time, that they had to throw somebody underneath the bus to please the people. But it doesn't change the fact that in Alabama, the general mindset of many of these counties is that when incest and child abuse is involved, the courts are very lenient. But when an individual does something that goes against their moral standings, or when an individual does something that doesn't fit their political narrative, or when the person being arrested isn't a U.S. citizen, they give them some pretty hefty bonds. None of this makes sense, and it all contributes to making Alabama one of the worst places to live, where people who are dangerous are released back into the streets, but people who break the law are thrown underneath the bus simply because, well, that's what they needed at the moment. This town here in Etowah, Gadsden, is a town that has seen a lot of hard times. They've seen population loss, they've seen industries fail, and they've seen their populations decline, and their homicide and crime rates have made this one of the most undesirable places to live in the United States, reflected by the affordable real estate prices. But when communities try to move in and fill the gap that all these failed people left behind, they go after them heavier than the people that are actually making their community a horrible place to live. And if this is the general mindset of people in Alabama, to run off the people that are trying to make things better and continue giving impunity to those who are dangerous criminals, what type of society do you think they're creating? I really think that the purpose of today's video is to help people understand why Alabama is so dangerous and why it is a state that they should avoid for their families. Even if they're looking for affordability, there's a reason why real estate prices in Alabama are so low. It isn't that there's something wrong with the buildings or the roads or the trees or the mountains. There's something wrong with the way the state's being run, making it a very dangerous place where dangerous individuals don't have to worry about the consequences of their actions, making Alabama one of the scariest places to live in the United States. You know, Mississippi and Louisiana actually have worse crime analytics than Alabama, but despite that, I still think Alabama is much more dangerous of a state than those states, because in Alabama, it isn't a person you know that's going to hurt you. It could just be a person that has a lot of impunity that wants to hurt you, and many times they're able to get away with it.